Welcome to Small Town Tales, a podcast where we hear stories of the paranormal, haunting legends, and all things spirit. Join us as we explore the unknown. Now, here's your host, C.L. Thomas.
Welcome to another episode of Small Town Tales podcast, and tonight's guest is Jereme Leonard. He is a professional firefighter, a co-host of Travel Channel's Ghost of Morgan City, and he calls himself the Cajun Demonologist. Jereme, thank you for being on the show. I'm really honored to have you on.
My pleasure.
To get us started, how did you get into the paranormal as a demonologist?
Well, actually, I didn't get into the paranormal as a demonologist at all. I mean, I could promise you career day in school, I didn't raise my hand and say, hey, I want to be a demonologist. It did not happen that way. In fact, whenever I got into the paranormal field, to say that I truly believed in the spiritual realm, I have to be honest and say that I truly didn't. You know, I'm a firefighter, so I'm not going to lie, I'm a thrill junkie, okay? And that was just one of those things that having a door slammed in your face is like terrifying and wonderful all at the same time, right? So I got into the paranormal field simply by watching Ghost Lab on TV one day, and that goes to show you how far back this goes. And me and my cousin decided to go play ghost hunter in our local cemetery, and lo and behold, we captured something that intrigued us, and we formed a paranormal team called Paranormal Society of Ponchatoula. And, afterwards, we got popular really fast because this is back before there were a whole lot of paranormal teams. I think we were the only one in the state of Louisiana. And we got a local TV show in the parish that we live in. Most places it's called counties. Well, here in the South, in Louisiana in particular, we call them parishes. And we had a lady that claimed she went to the Myrtles Plantation, which is, a tourist destination. And she claimed that a demon followed her home and it was terrorizing her and her three daughters. Well, as fate would have it, I ended up seeing a demonic entity with my own two eyes in that house that night, even though I really didn't know what it was at the time. But, when most people think of a ghost or a spirit, they think of kind of like this translucent figure that you can see through. It's not what I saw. This thing was as solid as a person standing, behind me. I was looking at it through a mirror. And it was about 7 foot tall because his head came right to the top of the door frame. And I know, most door frames were 7 foot tall. And what was odd about it was his arms are really long and his fingers were twice the size of a normal person's fingers. But that's not the worst part. Whenever I seen the head, there was eyes, but there was nothing else. There was no nose, no mouth. Most people perceived to be the Slender Man. So I ran out of the house expecting to never return. We left that night. But there was one image that stuck in my mind was there was an air mattress in the living room, and that is where they slept at night, and they had crucifix all the way around it. So I figured, well, if I'm not going to go back, I'll find help. Well, I went to a local minister here, and, they basically told me I need to stay away from people like that. So then I went to the Roman Catholic Church. Now, the Roman Catholic Church never said that they would not help her, but they kept asking if she was Catholic. And I told them no. Well, then they said, well, she would have to convert to Catholicism and so more because there's a procedure before the Roman Catholic Church can get involved in something like that. Well, we didn't have that much time. So for the next 6 months, I basically was a barrier between the family and the entity. I went to work, and whenever I was at home, I stayed with that family for a period of 6 months. And eventually I was able to find someone to do an exorcism on her. And after that, I kind of got out of the paranormal field for a little while because I seen the dark side of it and it wasn't fun anymore. And I ended up writing a book about, everything that happened in that house, and it was published. And I had a Catholic priest, friend me on Facebook, and I kind of found out he was a retired exorcist out of Pennsylvania. And, of course, I had a million questions, and we just kind of formed like a father-son friendship. And, over a period of time, he taught me the basic roots of everything that I know today.
What was the name of that book?
The Dwelling, a Dark Entity. You can actually find it on Amazon.
So you worked with Chris Jericho on hunting monsters, right?
Yes, I did.
What are some of the monsters around Louisiana?
Well, you got to remember, in Louisiana, we're Cajuns, right? So Cajuns are very superstitious people. All right. We believe in having a mirror outside on your front porch because the devil's so vain, right? He walks up and he sees himself, and he's going to sit there and look at himself in the mirror instead of trying to get into your house. Okay, I know that sounds crazy to most people, but in the South, especially in Cajun country, they truly believe this stuff. Okay, it's common in the South to go to a restaurant and see somebody look around and throw a little bit of salt over their shoulders. They think it brings them good luck. So but particularly we have what they call the rougarou, and then we also have what they call the swamp ape. So the rougarou would be more of what people say is a werewolf. Okay. So the backstory of the rougarou kind of is like the werewolf. A man done evil deeds and he was cursed, and at night, he had to live off the blood on a full moon, which they're having tonight, right? So these rougarou running around in the swamp. But and then we have the swamp ape, which is basically Bigfoot. So, and that's what me and Chris Jericho was kind of hunting, I think, years ago. Now, I'm going to tell this story. And can I say 100% that it was a Bigfoot? No, I can't. But all right. So I live probably about 3 or 4 miles from what they call Man Shack Swamp. It's known as one of the most haunted swamps in America. So it's this old road. You go down there. There's no traffic in there. There's bayou and water on both sides of the road. So people go there fishing all the time. And years ago, me and a buddy of mine was out there fishing at night, and we seen something that first we smelt it. It was something horrendous. It smelled like a wet dog. And then we seen this bipedal, thing cross the road. Now, was it Bigfoot? I don't know. I mean, it could have been a bear because even though it is rare, we do have bears here in southern Louisiana. But trust me when I tell you there's weird things that exist out there that most of us have no idea. So, who knows?
Do you think that some of the monster creatures are actually negative forces?
I do. So I believe that, and I'm going to use the Mothman for an example. I think that is what you call a collective consciousness. So a lot of the power of many is more powerful than the power of one. Okay. So in the occult, I'm going to use witchcraft for an example. When you have a covenant, you have a bunch of people that get together and they do rituals together. So they're all focusing their thoughts and their energy on something specific. Okay. I think that can happen. So it's a collective consciousness. Like one person claims they see the Mothman. Okay. So then everybody else is thinking about it. They go out looking for it and they have encounters and everybody. So in this small concentrated area, you have a lot of people that is projecting that, right? So our thoughts is purely spiritual. Okay. Important to understand this. This is spiritual warfare 101. Our thoughts is purely spiritual. Most people don't realize this, but when you think your thoughts, you are visualizing everything that you are thinking. So that's taking something from a pure spiritual state. And now you're manifesting it by your thoughts into the physical world in which we live in. See, we perceive the world through what? Our sight, right? So when we visualize something, we're using, our visualization as far as what we're thinking. Okay. So to use the way to put this so people can understand what I'm saying is you can see a flower, a rose, a red rose. Okay. You might say it's beautiful, right?
Do you think that some of these monster-like creatures can actually be a demonic force or a negative entity?
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So, when we talk about, these mythical creatures, does that necessarily mean that they are quote unquote demons? No, they're not. So you have to understand what a demon is. A demon is a pure spiritual being. Okay. It is a fallen angel. Okay. So when most people think about demons, they think about these, scary looking, lizard looking creatures and all that. In fact, that is not how demons look at all. In fact, demons look like angels. They just fell from their grace. However, they can take the form. You have to understand when a demon is oppressing somebody, is wanting to put fear in that person, it'll take the form that they're afraid of. Okay. So in general, right. So demons don't haunt places or locations. They want to haunt or inhabit humans. That is why it is called possession. Okay. However, there are supernatural forces in this world that we would consider to be evil spirits or evil energy. So you got to think about energy. There's two types. There's positive energy and negative energy, and they both feed or attract their own, right? So when people claim they see the Mothman, so that strikes fear. So that is a negative type of energy. So when you have a lot of people projecting that negative energy, and through their thoughts and everything, they are giving it a physical appearance, that energy can manifest itself. Okay. If it's not like a self-manifestation, I guess another way that you could put it is kind of like an elemental. Okay. So elementals are spiritual beings. They're not good nor bad. They're guardians of nature, in fact. That's where we get the mythology of leprechauns, fairies, all of these different things. Okay. Yeah. But in different folklores, right, they take different appearances, such as trolls, leprechauns. It may be the same thing, but it's all in a different culture in the way that they perceive it to be. So I hope I'm explaining it. It's a complex thing, but I think I kind of at least explained it in a way that your general, people can understand what I'm saying.
So with angels, there's like an order of angels, right? You have your guardian angels, such as Michael.
There's 9 orders of angels.
Is there a hierarchy to the demonic realm?
Absolutely. So, in the angelic world and the demonic world, you got to remember, Satan mimics everything of God. So, the demons will also mimic everything that's angelic. You got to remember, in the beginning, they were all angels. Okay. So you got to think of it as kind of a military ranking. So in the orders of angels, you had the seraphim and the cherubim, you had the dominions, you had the thrones, you had the watchers, you had the archangels, then you had the angels, and so on. So in the demonic realm, it's the same way. So the demons that possess us are human beings. They're going to be what you would call your foot soldiers, okay? So in the military, you have your generals, you have your colonels, you have all of those. Those are the high-ranking angels that are calling the shots and telling the foot soldiers what to do. So yes, the spiritual world is very much, in orders, as far as what we would perceive to be military. They work in the same way.
So where does the human fit in all of this?
The human fits in all of this because God created us in his image, right? As far as the Bible tells us. So where exactly or how exactly did the angels fall? That there's several different belief systems to this. Have you ever heard the term the Watchers?
Yes.
So the Watchers was a group of angels. That's job, again, there's 9 orders of angels. All right, one of them is actually called the Watchers. Their job was to watch over mankind. Well, if you read Genesis chapter 6, it says, when man began to multiply on the face of the earth and daughters were born unto them, the sons of God saw the daughters of man and saw that they were fair, and they each took one as they chose as wives. There was giants in earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man. All right, and that's all Genesis really says. But if you break this down, biblically, what the text is saying was there was a group of angels that left their first estate. They took on human bodies and they descended to the summit of Mount Hermon. Okay. So, and then they took wives and then they had children by them, which were called the Nephilim, which were the giants. Okay. So if you go back and you study archaeology, they find giant skeleton remains all over this world. Okay. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is proof. This is scientific fact. This isn't, a fairy tale. This can be backed up scientifically. When we talk about Noah's flood, most people believe that, man became so corrupt that God decided to flood the world and wipe the slate clean. That's only half the truth. You see, if you go by the belief system of the Nephilim, God created a heaven for us to go to, okay? He didn't create a heaven for the Nephilim, the giants, to go to. They were an abomination. Right? So what he done was he flooded the earth to wipe them off the face of the earth. Okay. Now, the biblical text in Revelations also says that in the end days, when Christ returns, that the Nephilim will rise again. All right. So, but that's the story for another day. But what happens is Noah sent, so you can actually find this story in the book of Enoch. Okay. So Enoch is not in the Bible. However, in Jesus's day, it would have been a very, very, very popular text. Okay. Um, Enoch was Noah's great-great-grandfather. So in order to what Noah, the best way to put this is when we talk about genetics, Noah had the purest genetics of God's original creation. All right, that's why he chose Noah to repopulate the earth after the flood. All right, that's one. The second one is the fall of Lucifer. Okay, so Lucifer was vain. He decided he wanted to be God, right? And he tried to overthrow God. Well, there was war in heaven when Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought against his angels but did not prevail. And they were cast to the earth and his angels with him. Okay, so with that being said, Lucifer was cast to the earth and his angels were cast here with him. All right, so there's two separate stories of the possibility of the origin of what we perceive demons to be. Which one do I believe? I believe it's a combination of both. I think both these events did happen, okay? And I think that's kind of, where we come from. So when we talk about pure demonic entities, when people's possessed and they're speaking Latin and so on like that, I think that is a pure spiritual demon that would have been with the fall of Lucifer, okay? But then when we talk about demons, again, they have certain jobs they do. Some are just to influence people. It all goes on how powerful the entity actually is, on what it's capable of, okay? So the Nephilim, that might be what we perceive to be evil spirits. Not really demons, but evil spirits.
Gotcha. So when you walked into this case with the lady who picked up the demonic entity from the Myrtles,
right?
Do you feel like that was why did they pick her, and why were they hanging out at the Myrtles?
Well, they weren't. You see, here's where it got deep. Now, this is what she told me in the beginning, that she went to the Myrtles plantation and a demon followed her home. And one of the things that I could not understand was, okay, you have thousands of people that go to the Myrtles plantation every year, and you're telling me a demon followed you home and it was, terrorizing you and your three daughters. That did not make sense to me. Again, at the time, I did not know anything about demonology at all. But I will tell you this. So, in fact, a demon cannot just see you walking down the road and say that I want to possess you. It does not work that way. In fact, a demon cannot do anything against our free will. You see, free will is very powerful. Okay, you have to, in fact, invite these things into your life. Now, it's a lot easier than you would think, okay? But in her case was, I could not just put the two and two together and say, okay, well, this demon come from the Myrtles plantation. There had to be something else. Well, come to find out, she was holding a dark secret. You see, Joy was a devout Christian. And when she was about 6 years prior to the haunting starting, she went to Honduras on a church mission trip. Now, if you know anything about Honduras, hoodoo, which is a very dark version of voodoo, runs rapid over there, okay? And Joy was a virgin at the time, okay? And she went on so she was fascinated because they lived in mud huts over there. So the guy that was there with the church group all week, she felt comfortable with him, and she talked him into taking her on a private tour of the town that everyone lived in. Well, she said that he led her into a mud hut, and there was two other gentlemen standing there, and they had an altar there. And they performed a ritual on her because it was summer solstice. Now, here's where everything started to make sense. In the demonic world, everything is finalized by blood, okay? All right? Because blood is the life source, okay? So she was on her menstrual cycle during all of this, and this is what made everything possible. So she was raped by these two gentlemen, and this kind of gets a little bit graphic, and if anybody gets, I apologize, but I have to tell the story as it is. They took the blood from the menstrual cycle and they put markings on her body, and they told her that they were, they done a ritual to allow demons to enter into her body. Okay. Now, remember I told you that demons have to have a legal right to somebody. Okay. Right. There's loopholes to this. All right, so there was a ritual that was conjured up, which means that through that ritual, through the blood, everything was in place for it to have a legal right to be attached to her. Now, the entity still needed the opening point to start the infestation. So think of it as a parasite. It lay dormant until something happened in her life where she freely invited it in, okay? Even though the attachment was there. Again, a lot of people think earthbound spirits attach themselves to people. I hate to be the bearer of bad news. That don't happen. Earthbound spirits haunt locations, okay? They are going to stay somewhere that they were familiar with when they were alive. They're not going to follow a complete stranger home. I'm sorry. Demons, on the other hand, they will. They will wait for that opening. But that's another story. So what happened was when she went to the Myrtles plantation, she took a picture of dust. Okay, I'll say it. I still say it to this day. More than dust outside. But she was bound and determined that was an orb. Okay. And she became obsessed with it. Obsessed.
That's where it all starts, right?
She became obsessed. So guess what? She opened herself up and allowed this thing to have a legal right. And that's when the infestation started.
Demonology and the idea of demons has grown in pop culture tremendously over the last couple of years. Can you comment on that a little bit?
Well, I'm going to say this. There are some really good demonologists out there. First of all, being a demonologist is not a self-given title. Okay, you know, in opening, you stated that I call myself a demonologist. Well, actually, that name was given to me by my peers, of course, because I'm actually from Father Padre is the one that gave it to me, the one that trained me, because I was from the South, right? So I was known as the little Cajun boy. But the bad side is demonology. To be a true demonologist, you have to be a true student of the theology, okay? And there's a lot of people that present themselves to be that's not. And there's a lot of bad advice that gets given out there. You know, it's not my job to knock anybody. You will never hear me publicly call out anybody for that. That's not my job to do. Okay. Yeah. People come to me. That's the ones I deal with. I can't worry about what everybody else does, but there is a lot of, you know, bad advice out there, and people that go by that title, that's, you know, I wouldn't necessarily say that's what they are.
Yeah.
It's just such a popular thing right now, you know, and kind of like whenever I got back into it, whenever I first got into it, the only other demonologist that I knew that was a demonologist was Keith Johnson, you know, and I mean, you know, it's kind of like everybody, you go through Facebook and you see demonologist this, and I'm like, okay, well.
Yeah. Do you think that's opening people more to opening themselves up to this darker world in the long run?
Yeah, I think so. I think that happens in the paranormal in general, and I'm going to tell you why. So, again, energy feeds or attracts its own kind, all right? So think about this. Every weekend, you have thousands of paranormal teams that go to these dark locations, okay? And they're communicating with spirits, okay? And the number one thing that I always tell people is anytime you communicate with the spirit, never ask personal questions, because there is no law or rule that says spirits have to be honest with you. Now, is there? No. And do you truly think, and you know, another thing that a lot of people will say is, oh, I heard this voice say that it was a demon or it was Satan or something like that. Number one, that's not a demon. A true demon is never going to give up its true identity. In fact, it's going to try to present itself as something non-threatening so that you may get personal with it and open yourself up and give it that legal right. So it's going to be the opposite. But in general, you know, you have paranormal teams that go to all these locations, and, you know, they're happy and they're the best of friends going to the investigation. Well, after spending a couple of hours in these real dark places, you know, they're mortal enemies on the way home. Okay. And then, you know, this one will post the evidence. Well, this other paranormal investigator has done the same thing. He says that's just dust or whatever. So next thing that you know, they're feuding and fighting, and it just expands. Why? Because it's negative energy and it's feeding, it's expanding, you know. And it's not that a spirit follows them home, but think of it as standing by a campfire. That smoke gets in your clothes, right? And when you go inside, you can still smell that smoke. Well, that negative energy soaks into your body, okay? And it takes a while for it to reside. You ever notice when you come back from a paranormal investigation, maybe you just feel like you just ticked off at the world and you have absolutely no idea why? Because your body has absorbed that energy. So, yeah, I think that holds true for, not just the demonology side of things, but also, the paranormal thing, because I would hope that the demonologists, they know what they're getting themselves into, and they know what the boundaries are, and they know what they can and cannot do, and how far they can push something. I would hope so anyway.
Is it your experience that coming across demonic possession or oppression, is it rare?
So oppression is a lot more common than what you would think. Possession is rare. Okay, so I have done I don't even know the exact number. I want to say probably around 8 exorcisms. All right, my entire career. Now this is true possessions. Now doing a deliverance on somebody that is being oppressed, that happens a lot. Okay, so let me kind of give people an idea of what's the difference between oppression and possession. So in any demonic haunting, there's 3 stages, and all 3 of these stages have to occur in a certain order. Again, demons cannot just do anything that they like, okay? So number 1 is the infestation. It means that you have legally invited it into your home, okay? So then you're going to have all the signs of a haunting, but a demonic infestation is going to get a lot more destructive really fast. Okay. Again, demons do not want to haunt locations. That's not what they do. So what they're doing there is they're testing the water. Okay. They're going to see who in that family has the weakest will, the easiest target for them. So now the entity is going to try to oppress itself to a certain individual. So now when that person leaves the home is quiet. When that person's at the home is active. Now the entity, in fact, follows that person wherever they go. They're not being possessed at that time. They're being oppressed. Okay, but what the demon is trying to do during oppression is to break that person down mentally, physically, spiritually, completely isolate that person, use what that person loves against them until their will is completely broken. Again, a demon cannot just possess someone. You have to, in fact, give it permission to possess you. So how does that happen? In Joy's case, it attacked her kids. Okay, a mother's love, until it got to the point to where Joy said, do whatever you want to do to me, but leave my children alone. Well, guess what? You just granted it permission for possession to begin.
That's really interesting. So you said you come across 8 different cases where you had to actually do an exorcism.
Yes.
Do you have like a certain, like, how do you assess the situation and determine that this is a demonic thing going on? Or do you think, like, I don't know, like, what's the difference between mental illness, like depression or things like that?
Glad you asked that. So number 1 rule is you would never, ever, ever, ever want to do a exorcism on somebody that is suffering from mental illness. You are going to do irreversible damage. Okay. So possession mimics bipolarism and schizophrenia almost to the T. Sometimes it's very hard to distinguish between the both. Now, me, I don't have psychiatrists that I can call in and all of those things. But the last thing that I would ever want to do is do an exorcism on somebody that has a mental illness. So you have to be very clever. I have to find a way to prove that it is something spiritual that's going on and not something mental. And I use this one analogy anytime I do a radio show, of a certain case on how I determine that. Okay, so face-to-face interviews are always very critical. 1, you need to know the questions to ask, and 2, you should know what the answer should be. Certain things, demons do certain way they operate. All right, and a true demonologist is to know these things. Well, put all of that aside. This one particular person, I could not figure out if it was mental illness or if she was being oppressed right at that merge of possession. And I needed to make sure. Well, lo and behold, I noticed she didn't have any shoes on when we were sitting at the table. So the little light bulb in Jeremy's big old head went off, and I said, I'll put this to rest right now. So I told her to go outside, that I was going to exorcise the house or bless the house. But for her own safety, I needed her to go outside. Well, she went outside, closed all the curtains. I didn't exorcise the house. I took holy water right there where she was sitting, and I rubbed it on the floor where her feet were. And then I aired it and waited for it to dry. Now, If it was purely mental, when she sat down in that chair and put her feet on the ground, nothing would happen. Okay? Nothing. If it was spiritual, two things can happen. Number one, she's going to grab her feet and say her feet's on fire. Number two, she is going to go in an all-out rage, and that entity is going to take over. Okay? So if that happens, my team and me have to know exactly what to do at that moment, because violence is about to take place. So after we got done, I let her come back inside, and as soon as she sat down, she put her feet on the floor, she grabbed her feet, and she said her feet was on fire. That gave me that gave me that hard concrete evidence that I needed in order to proceed. So you just have to be clever about things like that. You know, you have to think of what can you do that would affect something on a spirit, something spiritual, that if it's mental, they would not know what's going on. So
how do you prepare yourself to go into these situations? Is there a certain set of items that you take with you? Do you do prayers to protect yourself?
You know, I have my boxes here. I have my rosaries, everything that I use. Yes, I have a box that I actually bring with me. It has everything. But here's the thing. You're preparing for spiritual warfare, okay? So let me explain this to you. Spiritual warfare is exactly what it says it is. It is a battle that takes place purely spiritual, okay? Just like I asked you earlier, what do you say is the pure spiritual side of your existence? It's your thoughts, okay? So when you do spiritual combat, you have to know how to walk on both planes of existence. The battle takes place in the spiritual realm or the celestial world. But you live in the terrestrial world, but the spirit affects the terrestrial world. That's why we say the rituals out loud, okay? The battle takes place here. It's the battle between the will of the entity and the exorcist, okay? A lot of people say, well, you know, does that person's belief play into it? So what if you have somebody that is, you know, an atheist? Will an exorcism still work? And the answer is yes, because once that person invites you in, and I always make them say, Jereme, I want you to perform an exorcism on me, because when they do that, what are they doing? They're inviting me in as well. So now me and that entity, we're on the same level playing field. All right. So yeah, I got just as much advantage as it does. The only difference is I can't lose. He can live for another day. If I lose, it'll destroy my life. All right. So talk about a burden on your shoulders, right? But at that point in time, that person's belief has nothing to do with it, because during the exorcism, that entity is going to come forth and it's going to take control of that person. That person is not really going to hear what's going on, okay, until the expulsion. Now, after the expulsion takes place, usually they seen the power of God. They felt the power of God. So at that time, you know, they convert on their own. I never push anybody, you know, their religious beliefs, because it's not my job to judge anyone. In my belief, God's going to judge everyone when they die. That's his job, not mine. Okay, my job is to help the person dealing with what they're going through. So I go from that perspective. So that battle is something that purely takes place spiritually. So again, visualization plays the role in spiritual warfare. You have to visualize everything that you were wanting to happen. Whenever I have holy water and I throw it on the wall, I visualize that wall turning from black to a brilliant light. So darkness can't exist where the light is, right? So if I make a room light here in the spiritual realm, what's done on earth shall be done in heaven, then that darkness is not going to stay in that room. So you could take it and you could force it out until it has nowhere else to go. Okay, so that is the best way that I can describe how spiritual warfare actually works. But here's the thing. Here is the key to it all. You have to 100% believe in what you are doing. If you second guess you at any time, you are going to undo everything that you have done. Now, that entity's job is to distract you and try to make you feel, you know, to distract you, because if it distracts you just for that split second, it's going to undo everything. And as long as it has that legal right, that is why it's called the right, R-I-T-E, of exorcism, because the entity has to have a legal right to somebody. And if you do not break that legal right, so the legal right is the entry point of how the demon got there in the first place. Okay. Which is used playing with a Ouija board for an example, which boggles my mind. Why anybody would play with a Ouija board in their own home is beyond me. Just like people doing EVP sessions or trying to communicate with spirits in their own home. Do you realize how dangerous that is? Because we are more prone to get personal with the spirit when we are doing an EVP session or playing with a Ouija board in our home, because our home is our sanctuary. Okay, so that's when we're going to be more prone to answer personal questions when we think we're talking to Uncle Bob, right? And especially, Uncle Bob's telling us all the answers to make us truly believe he's Uncle Bob. But he's just waiting for you to get personal with him. Then that gives it that legal right. So in the rite of exorcism, you have to break that specific right in order to be able to expel the entity. That's why exorcisms, the ritual itself, and I always write my own because it makes it very unique to the case, okay? You have to be very precise on what you are demanding the entity to do in the name of Christ.
Why do you think there's a biblical story? I don't know why I just thought of this, but they cast the demons out of the girl and
into the swamp pigs, right? So you got to think about this. The demons, if they was to be cast out and they were sent to the foot of the cross for judgment, they get sent back to hell. They got an answer of why they failed, right? So they didn't want to go back. They would rather live in the pigs than have to go back and face the consequences of what happened to them because they failed. That's why they went into the swine of pigs. Well, so what happened was, Jesus showed mercy, which is what Jesus does, right? He showed mercy. He sent them into the swine. Well, it's kind of like the genie in the bottle thing, right? You be careful what you wish for, because you might get wish might not always turn out the way you want it to, right? So he said, okay, well, I will send you to the pigs. That way they would give in and freely go. Correct? Okay.
correct.
Without a fight on his side. Well, then once the transformation was done, he said, phew, and he sent the pigs right over the side. So guess what? They ended up there anyway, even though they didn't want to.
What are some of the things that happen to an individual during oppression? Are there different stages that a person will go through?
No, not really. Again, it all depends on how powerful the entity is. So usually during oppressions, the person will become withdrawn. They will be very, very negative all the time. They will have scratches on their bodies. A lot of people claim that, they could feel an entity standing over them in their bed and it feels like they're being held down. You can have those physical marks, bruise marks, things like that. Now, the difference between sleep paralysis and, truly entity like that is you're usually going to have bruises and marks on your body. Okay. Now, just not feel like you're being held down. The person becomes very withdrawn. The person may start to show interest in things that they've never shown interest in before, such as maybe smoking, drinking, all of these things. So the job of a demon is to defile somebody, defile the flesh. The entity experiences the same thing that a person does, during that time. So the person experiences getting drunk, well, the entity does. Now, this usually happens more, in stages of possession and oppression. But it's going to isolate the person. If you love your goldfish, hey, it's going to kill your goldfish. It's going to do everything it can to break your spirit, break your will to where you just completely give in. There's no fight left in you. Is the best way to describe, what actually happens during oppression. But from the outside looking in, when somebody is being oppressed, the family members are going to notice that there's spiritual activity when that person is around. Okay. So when that person leaves the house is going to be quiet. Everything proceeds to happen with or around the certain individual.
Has it ever been in your case where a person has committed suicide or killed somebody or anything like that?
So suicide, do I think that suicide happens with people that's under possession? Yeah, I think it can happen. No, I've never been involved in anybody that's killed anybody before, thank God, and I hope I don't ever. The cases where that can occur, would be what we would call perfect possession. I've never seen perfect possession. Perfect possession is where the entity has full control of that person, thoughts and body or motor functions 24/7. That person's soul, or what we perceive to be a soul, that person's consciousness is just along for the ride at that point. It's very rare. Perfect possession is very, very rare. I've only known of maybe 4 or 5 cases that I've ever read up on of what we would call perfect possession. So a lot of people think that when that person is being possessed, that the entity has control of that person all the time. That's not true. That's why I say it mimics bipolarism and schizophrenia almost to the T, because the entity will come forth and take control of a person for a short period of time. Then it will retract itself. But the more powerful it grows, the more of that merge, that fusion that happens, the more control the entity has of that person. The more it can defile that person, the more it could take away that person's fight. Get what I'm saying? Even when possession starts, there's still a little bit of fight there between that person's consciousness, that person's will, that person, and the entity. So they have to really work for it, to be honest with you. When possession happens, they have to really work for it. It's not something that happens overnight. That's why a lot of people always say, well, how does someone know if they're possessed? Trust me. If someone is truly possessed, they will know. They will know.
That's interesting. I wanted to ask you about a couple of cases that you listed on your website. The first one being the Stinson case. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, the Stinson case is the case that I told you that I was talking about that got me involved in demonology. That's what is referred to the Stinson case. Now, have you checked out my website and listened to the audio?
I have not listened to the audio yet.
Well, go and listen to the audio. If you want to know what true possession sounds like and what a true demonic case is like, listen to the audio clip. So what that case was, there were video cameras and audio recorders in every room of that house that ran 24/7. Okay. Mm-hmm. And that's some of the stuff that you could actually hear her oldest daughter at the time under possession. You could hear the entity talking to the youngest child through the audio. Now, I am going to warn your viewers. Viewer discretion is advised when you listen to this, because it is very, very strong, okay? And it may be a little bit more to some people to stomach, but the reason it's on there is because this is fact. This stuff is real. And this goes to show you what that situation is like. So look at it, viewer discretion advised.
I think I'm gonna steal a clip from your website to play with this, if that's okay with you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. No problem with that at all.
So you have another one, the Demon House.
The Demon House, yeah. The Demon House was showed on, what show was it showed on? I'm not really sure at the moment which show it is. It's not a haunting. It's not When Ghost Attacks. Now, the Joy Stinson case was actually showed on a haunting and When Ghost Attacks. The other one is, but anyway, the Demon House is a house in Springfield. There was a paranormal team that called me in. Paranormal Society of New Orleans called me in. This family had bought what they thought was their dream home. A beautiful house. They got really, really cheap, and they didn't know why at the time. Well, they had a camper that they lived in while they were remodeling the house. Now, this is a beautiful house. I think the house is probably worth $300,000. They ended up getting it for like $100,000 or something like that. It was a huge steal. But the reason why is because almost immediately the wife started seeing and hearing things in the house and stuff like that. Now, she became the target. When I got called in, there was definitely a dark presence in the house. We had Bibles out, and we had a REM pod on top of it, and we started reading scriptures. And I mean to tell you, everything started going crazy. The REM pod flew off the Bible, and the Bible's pages started turning and everything. It was really, really wow. Okay. At that time, that was the first time I've ever seen anything like that, as far as, during the actual investigation. So after that night, I decided to cleanse the house, do an exorcism on the house. Well, when we were upstairs always seemed to be the peak of all the activity. whenever I was doing the cleansing of the house, whenever I got to the child's bedroom, all hell broke loose. Okay, there was like this roaring noise, like a lion. You could hear it coming up up the stairs, and the house vibrated like a train was going through the house. Now, this house was literally vibrating. Again, its job is to what? Make you stop doing what you're doing, correct? Yeah. Well, I stopped. Okay, we stopped. All right, we ran out of the house, and I needed to think. I knew everything referred to this one in particular room. Again, demons do not haunt homes. That's not what they do. They haunt what? People, or they want to inhabit people. But why was this demon in this house? This was truly a demonic entity. Why was it in the house? What was its legal right? Well, maybe it was bound there. Maybe somebody binded the entity to the house. Now, how does that happen? Well, during a satanic ritual, you put a pentagram on the floor, and you do this ritual and you pull the entity up through there. All right, now, in the occult, they know that if this entity can get the best of them, they're going to fall prey to the entity. So what they do is they create boundaries by symbols, okay? Basically, it's like a jail cell. The entity can't go past that. It's bound to the house. Well, in this case, we never did find the barrier, but I knew that the barrier, it had access to the entire upstairs. All right. But I knew there had to be a way that it got conjured there. So I had this great, brilliant idea that I wanted to pull up the carpet in the upstairs bedroom. Okay. So luckily the homeowner agreed, and when we did, there was a giant pentagram underneath the carpet there. Now, when you think of a pentagram, you think of this big, professional, elaborate looking pentagram. That's not what it looked like at all. It looked like kids drew it. But nevertheless, all the components that was there that needed in order to complete the ritual was there. And that's why the entity was in the house. Well, so she became oppressed, and I was working another case the first time when they done the exorcism on her, so I wasn't there. But I had somebody, it was a person actually done the exorcism in the Stinson case, because then I've never done an exorcism at that point in the Stinson case because I knew nothing about demonology. Well, I advised her that after she was to be delivered or exorcised, that floor needed to come up out of that house. Okay?
The whole floor?
Yeah. The floor, the entire floor that it was there, needed to come up out of that house. And I made that very well known. Well, the night that they done the exorcism on the house, the leader of Paranormal Society in New Orleans, both his brother and his father ended up in the hospital that very same night. The brother got in a car wreck, and his father ended up having health problems. And during the exorcism, it looked at Chris and told him that now he was the target. Okay. And I think what happened was it struck fear, because they will do that. Okay. You got to understand, these entities can see right through you, and they know what causes you fear. And that's what they're going to try to do. And after that happened, he did not want anything to do with anything of a malevolent type of haunting after that. Okay. He did not even want to talk about the case. Well, I didn't know that the person never did pull the floor. They decided to sell the house almost right after the exorcism took place. Well, about 6 months later, as it would be, I ended up getting a message from somebody that was talking about they was experiencing some stuff in Springfield, Louisiana. Could I help them? Sure, send me the address. When they sent me that address and I seen it, my heart stopped. I was like, oh, Jesus Christ. Because you got to know how these entities work, too. They have a way of pulling you into them. So think of this. If me and you got in a fight, I beat you up, you want revenge, right? These entities are the same way. And they have a way of pulling you to them. And I remember thinking to myself, Jeremy, do you really want to do this? Well, I decided I had to. And I went there, and sure enough, they had more carpet in the upstairs bedroom where it was. So I explained to the homeowner this time, I said, look, I done been to your house. I know exactly what's going on in your house. But in order for me to find out what the root of the problem is, I got to pull your carpet up. Yeah. I mean, like, what do you mean? So, well, there's probably a pentagram on the floor underneath this carpet. And he was like, all right, just do whatever you got to do. Sure enough, I pull it up, it's still there. Well, guess what? Chainsaws and cutting saws and everything went in the house that night and cut that entire floor out. Okay. And then I done a binding ritual, which means that I closed the gate, I closed the portal, and then we submerged it in water. You don't ever want to burn something like that, because when you do, you're going to set whatever the contents that's attached to it, you're going to set it free. So you submerge it in water, or you bury it on hollowed ground. Well, it was too big to bury on hollowed ground, so we submerged it in water. And as far as I know, still to this day, the house has been quiet.
So
but that episode, they made me out to be an old man in that episode. See, in that show, I wish I could remember what the name of the show was. They don't let paranormal teens come on there because that's not the way their format is. But they told a story, okay? And the guy that they had playing me was like some old man. I was like, what? How about that old? But anyway, yeah, I mean, that was one of the more popular cases. Even in this area right here, that house is very well known as, quote unquote, the demon house.
That's so interesting what you said about.
I think it's called Paranormal Witness. Paranormal Witness is the name of the show. It's called the Demon House.
That's it. Witness. I'm gonna look that up. Yes.
Paranormal Witness, the Demon House.
I wanted to ask you about this whole idea of a gateway and the pentagram being used to open a gateway. You see that, you're familiar with voodoo. It's very popular around the New Orleans area.
Absolutely.
Sigils as well is kind of a gateway for the spirit world to go back and forth.
Right. So, voodoo, again, you have to learn to distinguish between Hollywood and what's factual. Voodoo is known as voodoo dolls. We put curses on people and stuff like that. Well, voodoo, in fact, has a lot of Christianity into it. Voodoo itself, the native belief of voodoo is simply the worship of your ancestors. Okay. So what they do is they worship their ancestors for guidance and stuff like that in everyday life. Right. Well, when the slaves were brought to southern Louisiana, they were forced every Sunday to go to a Christian service. They would have a preacher that would come to the plantation, and the slaves would have to go through the services. Well, so they were forced, to go to Christianity. So what they done was they converted the two, okay, and kind of made it their own thing. That way the slave owners wouldn't really know what they were doing. So voodoo, look, you have to remember this when you talk about the occult. Everything really descends from the intent of the practitioner, okay? Whether something is used for good or bad. Again, there's two energies, positive energy or negative energy. You're going to be working with one or the other, so good and bad. And both these have to exist. There's no way around it, just like you can't have night without day, all right? So whatever you put out is believed you get back tenfold. Do I believe that? Yes, I do. That's why when we talk about demons from a Christianity standpoint, you have all these, if you go back through like the ancient Egypt, they had demigods like Horus, all of these different demigods, all right, which you see in every culture across the world. In my opinion, those are demonic deities. That was part of the Watchers that came, that descended onto Mount Hermon. They wanted to be God. So they were worshipped as gods. They go by different names in different cultures. Just like we think of demons, we call them demons. Well, the Muslims call them jinn, okay? But they're the same deities. They just go by different names. So
it's interesting, too. Is that, can you comment real quick? I know we're almost out of time. What is Solomon's demons?
So supposedly God gave Solomon a ring, which gave Solomon power over the demons, okay? And supposedly the demons built the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. See, this is kind of a touchy situation, because I know some demonologists that I really, really respect. When he does his exorcism, he uses the seal of Solomon, okay? Which means that the seal of Solomon, the actual seal itself, gains control over the authority of demons. So I couldn't do an exorcism on somebody unless I have the authority from Christ, okay? All right, so that's the best way. You have to be given the authority in order for it to happen, because I'm just a human. This thing can spit me up and chew me out, right? So there has to have some, just like the demon has to have a legal right, well, I have to have a legal right by something divine that says, Jereme, I back you from doing this, okay? So that's basically what the Seal of Solomon was, all right? It was a way to control the demons. So you got to really take what is myth and legend, supposedly from the story of Solomon, over what's factual. That there's no way of knowing. Have I seen the Seal of Solomon work? I have. Have I ever used it? No. So, I mean, when we talk about that in kind of like a general terms, I really can't. That's one of those questions that it was really hard for me to answer.
Well, I've got just two more questions for you. One of them, if somebody comes to you and they think, or maybe one of my listeners out there suspect that they might have an oppression of some sort, what would be your advice for them?
My fair advice would be for somebody that thinks they're being oppressed by somebody is, you know your thoughts, you know how you think, you know what you like, you know what you dislike, you know what your hobbies are, you know what your hobbies aren't. If you feel that something on a spiritual level or the way you're thinking is just not right, and you're finding yourself thinking thoughts that you normally wouldn't think, or if you feel like you're just being influenced, like that you hear this little voice per se, say, do this, do that. That is when you need to step back and you say, you know what? Something's not right with me right now. I need to really stop and figure out what's going on. So I always tell people this too. Again, I have to really distinguish between is something spiritual or something of medical, such as schizophrenia, bipolar. I always usually make them get a psychological evaluation done if I cannot determine it on my own. And that has happened. Just pay attention. You know who you are. All right. Again, pay attention to your thoughts. That's where it all starts.
The last question I have for you, on your website, you write about the profession of a demonologist, to think twice before undertaking such a position.
So, again, because of the popularity of being a demonologist, everybody wants to, be a demonologist. Look, I get people to send me messages on a daily basis. They're like, Jereme, you're a demonologist. How cool is that? How can I become a demonologist? I want to become a demonologist. And usually my answer is, no, you don't. You have no idea what you're saying right now. Think about this. If you decide you want to be a demonologist, you open that door. You can never close that door, okay? Once you decide to go through and actually take on a case where you do spiritual battle against this entity, again, these entities want revenge, okay? They will haunt you for the rest of your life. They will follow you and exist where the darkness meets the light and wait for you to become spiritually vulnerable, and they will try to destroy you. If they can't destroy you, they will try to destroy your family. Is that something that you want to live the rest of your life, knowing you have that lingering over your shoulder? No. Look, as for me, I had a massive heart attack October 5th, all right, not long after a case. Do I think that case played a role in it? Possibly, yes. I truly believe that. But that is a consequence that I knew I was taking the day that I got into it, okay? Because once you open that door, okay, so you have to invite entities and demons into your life, right? As a demonologist, you're opening a door, standing there and say, come through me, buddy. That's exactly what you're saying. Come through me if you're bad enough, all right? Now, if I never decide to take another case in my life, I will still be watched and haunted by these entities, and they will still wait until I am physically or spiritually vulnerable to try to get their revenge on me. That is why I have such a bubbly personality, because again, it's all about energy, right? So positive and negative energy can't coexist. They can't occupy the same space at the same time, which is your heart, your personality, who you are, right? So for me, that's what saves my life. Okay. For me, that is armor. Okay. That's not just me being me. That's my protection. And I know that. So you always have to learn to try to be positive. Now, we're human. Sometimes that's hard to do. Believe me when I tell you it is. But still, you have to be able to catch yourself and say, okay, I've let this go far enough. And it has to end, because that is an open invitation for you. Look, they're sitting there with their steak knife in one hand and their fork in the other, saying, come on, Jereme, come on, boy, just let it go down just a little bit more. So, it sounds funny, and I try to turn it into a joke, but that goes to show you how real it actually is. This is something that I can never, ever walk away from, no matter what. That is why I always tell people it has to be a true calling. As for me, I didn't voluntarily want to do this. In fact, there are several times in my life when I tried to run away from it. And it was like the more that I tried to run away from it, the more it was pushed in my face, until finally I gave in and I said, okay, God, if this is what you want me to do, you take me, with this where you want me to. And that's the way that it's always been.
But Jereme, I could talk to you all night long about this stuff, but we're out of time. Thank you for being on the show. Is there anything that you're working on that you want to share with us?
Well, so, a lot of people always say, well, what about Ghost of Morgan City season 2? We want season 2. Hey, I want season 2 too. Okay. But I will say this, I just filmed a project for a very, very popular network, so to speak, and it'll be coming out in October. It's a different show. It's not Ghost of Morgan City. I can't say what it is. I can't say what network and all that. All I can say is around October, be looking for me. You might find me.
We will definitely look for you, Jereme. Thank you for being on.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. It's been a great show, and it was very nice talking to you.